Nice audience too. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. Ladies and gentlemen,
He once held the nation in the palm of his hand. With his dazzling smile, quick wit, and unmistakable voice, Tony Barber wasn't just another TV host. He was the face of Australian primetime television. Night after night, millions tuned in to Sale of the Century, not just for the prizes or the trivia, but to see him. He was the game show king, the undisputed ruler of Australian entertainment. But what if behind the lights, the applause, and the fame was a man slowly losing everything? Few people know the truth about what really happened to Tony Barber after the cameras stopped rolling. There were whispers about business failures, financial missteps, crumbling relationships, and a desperate search for relevance in an industry that had moved on. Was it pride? Was it bad luck? Or was there something deeper at play? A haunting truth about fame, its fleeting nature, and what it takes from those who dare to chase it. Before the fall, Tony Barber was untouchable. But years later, his name vanished from the spotlight as if erased. No farewell show, no national tribute, just silence. In this episode, we uncover the story few dare to tell. A story of dazzling success and quiet collapse. A man who once had it all, and somehow lost more than anyone ever realized. Because sometimes, the real story begins after the credits roll. And Tony Barber's rise and eventual fall, we must rewind to an Australia before reality television. Before streaming platforms, before influencers. The 1970s and 1980s were the golden years of broadcast television, when families gathered around the living room screen every evening, and TV presenters weren't just entertainers, they were household names, national icons. And no one embodied that more than Tony Barber. Born in England in 1940, Barber emigrated to Australia with his family after World War II. He arrived not with fame or fortune, but with ambition, and a charisma that refused to be ignored. He cut his teeth in radio, moving across stations and roles, until eventually finding his calling on television. What he had was rare, not just charm, but timing, intelligence, and the ability to make any contestant or viewer feel like they mattered. Barber's television career truly exploded with Great Temptation in the early 1970s, but it was Sale of the Century, launched in 1980, that transformed him into a legend. The show was fast-paced, glamorous, and addictive, and Barber was the heart of it. He wasn't just a host, he was the show. Every evening, audiences tuned in not just to answer trivia questions, but to feel connected to a man who represented success, intelligence, and class. He made viewers believe in the idea of upward mobility, of glamour within reach, of victory that was both intellectual and aspirational. His presence was reassuring, polished, and deeply embedded in the culture of the time. At the peak of his fame, Barber was more than a celebrity. He was woven into the very fabric of Australian life. There were rumors of massive earnings, insider deals, even a run for politics. His influence stretched beyond the television screen, into advertising, publishing, and even motivational speaking. He seemed unstoppable. But what happens when the very medium that builds you up decides it no longer needs you? As the 1990s approached, the winds began to shift. The audience's appetite changed. Networks wanted younger faces, newer formats. The once loyal crowd began drifting toward different shows, different idols. And Barber, still holding on to the image that once made him a star, started to fade from view. Beneath the glossy exterior, cracks had begun to show. His personal life was far from the perfect picture painted on screen. A failed marriage, struggles with finances, business ventures that never took off. And perhaps worst of all, the slow erosion of relevance. For someone who had lived in the spotlight for decades, obscurity wasn't just unfamiliar, it was terrifying. But what really happened behind the scenes? Was Tony Barber a victim of changing times or of his own decisions? Was the fall from grace gradual or sudden and brutal? And how did the game show king become one of television's most silent disappearances? The answers, as we'll see, are far more complicated and far more human than anyone expected. Tony Barber's story began far from the shimmering lights of Australian television. Born Anthony Lewis Barber in Oldham, Lancashire in 1940, he was just 5 when World War II ended. The scars of post-war Britain shaped his early years, a gray landscape of rationing, rubble, and silent resilience. His family migrated to Perth, Australia in search of better prospects, like so many others in the post-war migration wave. But no one could have imagined that this boy from England would become the most recognizable face on Australian screens for over 2 decades. In the 1960s, Barber entered the world of radio, making his way through various hosting jobs in Perth and Sydney. His voice was smooth, confident, and unmistakable, made for broadcasting. But it was television that called to him. With the arrival of Great Temptation in 1970, Barber finally had his first breakthrough. The show was a precursor to his later triumph, and his style, fast-talking, polished, always in control, immediately clicked with viewers. He wasn't just asking questions, he was performing. He turned every contestant's story into a moment, and every trivia segment into a thrill. By the late 1970s, Tony Barber was already a staple on Australian television. But it was in 1980, when Channel 9 introduced Sale of the Century, that Barber's legend was truly born. The format was imported from the US, but the magic was all Barber's. He brought charm, intelligence, and pacing that made the show feel alive. Dressed in crisp suits, his energy sharp as ever, Barber could pivot between banter and tension in seconds. Viewers didn't just watch, they felt like they were in the room. Tony Barber made you believe winning was possible, one former contestant recalled. Even when you lost, he made it feel like a celebration. The show dominated ratings. It was, quite literally, the show of the decade. Every night, Australians returned from work, made dinner, and then sat down to watch Sale of the Century. Tony Barber wasn't just famous, he was family. His image was on magazine covers, billboards, even children's lunchboxes. He won the Gold Logie in 1973 and again in 1983, cementing his place in TV royalty. But even as the success mounted, the first shadows began to creep in. Barber was known to be intense behind the scenes, meticulous, sometimes moody. He demanded high standards not just from himself, but from his crew. Some producers whispered about burnout, others about ego. Still, none of it showed on screen. In 1991, Barber shocked the public by stepping down from Sale of the Century. The show would go on with a new host, but it was never quite the same. His departure was presented as a graceful exit at the height of his power. But rumors swirled. Had the network pushed him out to bring in fresh blood? Was he tired or quietly edged into retirement? After leaving the spotlight of Sale, Barber attempted several comebacks. He hosted Jeopardy Australia, among other smaller ventures, but nothing ever captured the same fire. His public appearances became rare. Whispers of failed investments and financial troubles began circulating in the industry. Projects promised but never delivered. A man who once seemed larger than life was now strangely absent. Then came the revelations. Barber, once one of the highest-paid stars in the country, was reportedly facing mounting financial strain. His motivational speaking career faltered. A self-published autobiography didn't sell. He launched a children's CD, tried a return to radio, even dabbled in politics. But none of it stuck. The world had moved on. People began to ask, how could someone so famous, so loved, simply vanish? It wasn't just the end of a career, it was the unraveling of a legend. The fall of Tony Barber wasn't explosive. It wasn't marked by scandalous headlines or a singular public meltdown. It was something more haunting, more insidious. A slow fade. A man once worshipped by millions slowly slipping into obscurity, clinging to past glories as the world he helped define turned away without so much as a farewell. After stepping down from Sale of the Century, Barber attempted to reinvent himself. In 1993, he was tapped to host the Australian version of Jeopardy! The project was ambitious, intellectual, and in theory, perfectly suited to his quick mind. But it flopped. The ratings were lukewarm, the format didn't resonate with local audiences, and Barber, once invincible, was now vulnerable. For the first time, a show with his name on it was considered a failure. Behind closed doors, things were worse. His first marriage had already ended in the mid-1980s, a quiet divorce that barely made headlines. But those close to him say the split had a deeper impact than most realized. His relationship with his children reportedly became strained, and the stability that once grounded his intense professional life began to crack. Financially, the 1990s were brutal. Despite earning enormous sums during his peak, Barber had invested heavily in ventures that didn't succeed. There were failed business projects, self-funded media attempts, and speaking tours that barely broke even. In 2003, he publicly admitted that he had lost a significant portion of his wealth due to poor decisions and trusting the wrong people. The game show king, once a symbol of glamour and abundance, was quietly battling debt and fading prospects. In a rare interview during that time, Barber said, "It's hard to watch the world forget you. Harder still to pretend it doesn't matter." His words were calm, but the pain was unmistakable. He confessed to struggling with depression and feeling disconnected from the industry that had once celebrated him. It wasn't just the loss of fame, it was the sense of purposelessness that came with it. There were moments of odd resurgence. In 2005, he appeared in a nostalgic TV special celebrating classic Australian television. The applause was warm but fleeting. No new projects followed. The industry had moved on to younger, shinier faces. The networks no longer called. And Barber, who once commanded the attention of a nation, was now a guest in his own legacy. Media outlets rarely covered his personal challenges, perhaps out of respect, or perhaps because he was already fading from relevance. But whispers persisted. Insiders talked about Tony trying desperately to re-enter the spotlight, pitching new game show concepts, even comedy pilots. None were greenlit. His proposals were considered dated, out of touch. He was a king without a kingdom. In 2007, a tabloid piece mentioned him living a quiet, semi-retired life with his partner in Sydney. It painted a picture of serenity, but behind that stillness was resignation. Tony Barber, who once lit up every home in Australia, was now a memory, a relic of a golden age no one had time to revisit. Perhaps the most tragic part? There was no scandal, no downfall born of disgrace, just the slow, cold erasure of significance. He didn't fall because of betrayal or self-destruction. He fell because he aged, because audiences turned, because television, brutal in its hunger for novelty, left no room for yesterday's heroes. And still, Barber never lashed out. He never blamed the industry publicly. In his own words, that's showbiz. One day, you're the star. The next, you're the trivia question. Those who worked with him remember a man of intense pride, who gave everything to his craft, who cared deeply about quality and connection. But they also recall a man who struggled to let go, who couldn't quite accept that the spotlight had moved on. And perhaps in that quiet struggle, we see the darkest truth of all, not just about Tony Barber, but about the nature of fame itself. It doesn't leave loudly, it simply forgets you. Tony Barber's story is not one of disgrace. It is not a cautionary tale about scandal or betrayal. Instead, it is something far more unsettling. It is a mirror held up to a society that worships fame, then discards its idols without ceremony. He was, without question, one of the most iconic figures in Australian entertainment history. His presence dominated an era, defined a generation's viewing habits, and shaped the very format of what we understood as primetime television. And yet, the silence that followed his departure is deafening. It would be easy to blame the industry, to say that television executives chased trends, cast him aside for younger talent, or failed to honor his contributions. But that would oversimplify a much more nuanced reality. The truth is, Tony Barber's fall wasn't orchestrated by any single villain. It was the result of an industry and an audience that is built on transience. He was extraordinary at a time when television demanded charisma, authority, and presence. But when that time passed, the very things that made him irreplaceable became liabilities. There's a certain injustice in how quickly he was forgotten. Unlike some of his contemporaries, Barber didn't reinvent himself into a new persona or repackage his fame through controversy. He remained, stubbornly and admirably, himself. The man who once hosted the biggest quiz show on Earth chose dignity over desperation. But the cost of that dignity was invisibility. This channel believes Tony Barber's legacy has been unfairly neglected. He wasn't just a performer, he was a builder of television culture in Australia. He brought elegance to trivia, class to competition, and sincerity to a medium often dismissed as shallow. His success wasn't accidental. It was the result of relentless work, showmanship, and a deep understanding of what audiences needed. Not just entertainment, but connection. His story is a warning, not just for entertainers, but for all of us. That fame is not a reward, but a lease. That applause doesn't echo forever. And that sometimes, even those who gave everything to the public will leave with no fanfare, no monument, just the fading warmth of what once was. So what do you think? Do you remember Tony Barber? Do you think his contributions were celebrated enough? Was his fall inevitable, or did we, as a culture, fail him? Let us know what you believe, because the truth about Tony Barber might not be what happened to him, but how easily we all forgot. Somewhere in the dusty archives of old TV stations, there are tapes of Tony Barber standing under the studio lights, his voice crisp, his suit immaculate, his presence magnetic. The music swells, the crowd cheers, and he leans into the camera with that unmistakable grin, the kind that once made a nation feel alive at 7 p.m. But today, that image feels like a postcard from another world. A time when television was ritual, when families gathered not just to watch, but to share. When one man, armed with more than charm and a cue card, could capture the hearts of millions. There are no statues of Tony Barber, no nightly reruns, no headlines remembering his last broadcast. And maybe that's the way he wanted it, or maybe not. We'll never really know. What we do know is that Tony Barber mattered, not just because of what he hosted, but because of what he represented. A golden era, a familiar voice, a sense of order and joy in a world that, even then, was starting to change too fast. His story isn't just about television. It's about time, about how quickly moments fade, how quietly legends disappear, and how sometimes the greatest loss is not scandal or tragedy, but being forgotten. Some stories are never told, but now you know. Tony Barber wasn't just the game show king. He was a memory etched into the glow of living room screens across a continent. And whether or not the world remembers, some of us still hear that voice, clear as ever. In the end, maybe that's enough. Or maybe, just maybe, it's time we remembered more.